Welcome to the Bond Online. My name is Eric, and today we are going to do user management in Azure AD with the Microsoft Graph API. The first thing I would like to show you is this link. I will describe it in or display it in the description below. This explains how to create users via the Graph API, and it's always handy to read this page because it also tells you which minimum API requirements you need. We need to configure that one in the Graph API connector. We configured that in the episode 1. I will demonstrate that later. It also explains what you need, which minimal attributes you need to fill in, and a few examples. The examples are in HTTP format, C#, JavaScript, Objective-C, Java, etc., and PowerShell, of course. What we are going to do is not use the PowerShell command because we are going to basically use the HTTP method. I will demonstrate that later because we are going to use the invoke REST command. But we will use this part, how to set the parameters in PowerShell. What we basically do is we set the parameters. They will be converted to a JSON file, and then the JSON file will send to the API URL mentioned here. And there also will be a method included, which is in this case post. Post is meant for new items that will create a new user account. In this case, you use patch to modify a user, get to read a user, and delete to delete a user. I will mention, like I said before, the URL in the comments below, so can you have a look on it yourself. But for now, we are going to set up the appropriate rights on the Microsoft Graph connector so we can create scripts to create a user via the Graph API. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the Azure portal, and then we go to Azure Active Directory, go to app registrations, select all applications, and there we see our Microsoft Graph API connector. We click on that. And then we're going to API permissions. Now, if you look at the manual, it says over here that for the application, it will at least require user read write all and directory read write all. So we're going to add that one. So we're going to do that, add a permission, select Microsoft Graph, application permission, type in user. No, it's not looking for it, so we scroll down. There it is. We deselect user read all because we are going to use the user read write all, and we also need user managed identities. If you don't select that one, you're not able to set the password, I noticed. So we need that, and we also need, like I mentioned in my script, the directory read write all permission. So we're also going to select that one. There it is, directory read write all, add permission. Now we're going to grant admin consent for the permission. That's required. Yes. Okay, so all the access rights are now in place for the Microsoft Graph API connector to create users via the script. So now we're going to Visual Studio Code. First thing we need to do is create a token access. Please keep in mind that if you adjust API permissions, you also need to refresh your token, otherwise you still have the old permissions. So we're now going to select line 18 till 26 of this script. If you need a detailed explanation on how to set this up, you can look at episode 1 and episode 3. That's where it explained in detail. Okay. Do we have token access? Yes, we do. That's great. So now we are going to create a single user account. That's example 1. I also have an example 2 and 3 and 4. The second one will modify the single user account. The third one will delete a user account. And the fourth one, we will create multiple users from a CSV file. So now we're going to use example 1. And what I would like to demonstrate is that basically this is the PowerShell format I showed you in the manual, and that will be converted to a JSON file format, and that will create the user. So what we are doing now in this script is set the parameters of the new users. These are the minimal required parameters. We have the API URL to create users. That's this one. If you look at the manual, you can see that's located over here. If you go into HTTP, you see you need to use this one. And we use a post command to create it. So we go back to the script. So now we have invoke REST method. That's basically sending the JSON file to this URL, and then the user will be created. So the next part is we need to fill this part. That's a URI. That's basically the URL. This part is basically used for authorization. That's a token we have created earlier. The method is post, because we're going to create a new user. And this is basically the body, the code you need to enter so that this part will be transformed to a JSON format. So we are going to run example 1, that's line 30 to 43, and see what happens. Okay, no error. Now we're going to see if the user John Doe is created in our Active Directory. Go to Home, select Azure Active Directory, Users. It may take up a minute before you can see it. Let's do a refresh. It's already there. Yep, there it is. John Doe. Okay, so we now created the user via the Graph API. The next thing we are going to do is, you see that we have made a typo in the display name, because it should be DOE instead of DO. So the next part of the example is how to make an adjustment to an existing user. So let's do that. Go back to Visual Studio Code. Yeah. Basically, the method is basically exactly the same. The difference is you first need to provide the UPN of the user you want to modify. Then you select in this part the attribute you want to modify. And if you look at the user, the Graph API URL, that's basically this one with the user name behind it. This can be the ID or the UPN, but it's always easier to work with the UPN because the ID is just a bunch of numbers and it basically doesn't tell you much. Same method again. You do the invoke REST method. You tell the API you're going to use. The header is for authorization. In this case, it's a patch method because you're going to modify an existing attribute. That's why you need to change the patch method. And the same, that's basically transferring the body into a JSON format and then send it to the Graph API. So let's run and see what happens. That's line 47 till 53. Okay, no error. That's always good. And like I said earlier, it may take up a minute. The issue is that the change already has been made in Azure AD, but the interface, the web interface, is a bit slow before it shows it. So we also have to wait a couple of minutes or a minute. See, it's already made a change. You can see it here. It made it John Doe. If you go back, refresh it. Yep, there it is. So we now change the display name from John Doe to John Doe. Okay, so let's go to the next example. Yeah, that's basically delete a user. That's exactly the same setup as the modification, except the only thing you need to do, we don't have a body, but because we don't have any modification, the only thing we want to do is delete the user. So we don't have a body of a modification we're going to make. We just use the method delete. And if you look at the Graph API URL, this is the UPN will be filled in of the user we want to delete. So that's basically the easiest code you need to create to delete a single user. So if you go to line 58 or 60 and run that, no error. Same again, it always takes a minute before it shows up in the Azure portal. Keep in mind the change already has been made with Azure AD, but it's just the Azure portal is a bit slow to show it. See, now it's gone. it's deleted. If you look at all users, it's not there anymore. Okay, so example 4 is basically if you want to make a bulk import of users. In this example, we use this import file that looks like this. It's basically 3 columns we've made. And what I would like to show you with this is that you can combine specific attributes in the code. So you can fill up, for example, you have a given name and surname, and with those information you can create a UPN. And it also has a password in this case. So with only these three values, you can create a user. It is CSV format, but since I live in the Netherlands, the semicolon is the separation for the delimiter. You can also, if you live in the United States or an English-speaking country, it probably will be a comma. So have to look at that you use to select to configure the proper delimiter. In this case, we're going to create these 5 users with this password and see what happens. Okay, so we scroll down. So what you can see is I create also a log file, and this is the location of the import file. And what it basically does, you're going to import it in the variable user. This is the delimiter value, what I say. That's in my case a semicolon, but it can be a comma also. Then it will read each line in the CSV file and generate these attributes. So if you're a bit familiar with PowerShell, for the user principal name is built up to the user given name, which will be converted to lowercase with a dot. Then the user surname also converted to use lowercase. Then we'll add the @ and then the tenant name. And basically you created UPN based only on 3 values or 4. Yeah, no 3, sorry. You can also use this to create a display name, the mail nickname, and the password. I personally always prefer to, if I use string values which are built up out of several other values, to do that in a separate string value. Like for example, you could also use this code directly into the user body, but I had some bad experiences with that, and that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I always create them in separate string attributes and then use these string attributes in the file itself. So we're going to run that and see what happens. And then after that, I will show you how the variables, if the variables are built up properly. So let's run that and see what happens. Okay, everything is done. Now, if you look at the CSV format, we've created Alfred Buchanan, Dave Pick, Connie Dijkstra, Martinez Tolkien, and John Bishop, and see if these users are already there in the Azure AD. Yep, you see them here. See, it created converted the UPN, made a name, and it's filled in like this. Okay, so yeah, that's basically it. Maybe we can look at the variables that have been created. They still should be there. So if you look at the user principal name, this is the last entry from the CSV file. You see it built it up from the CSV, like the john.bishop, it converted it to this UPN format. Yeah, look at the mail nickname, similar. See, small caps behind each other. These fields you obliged to enter this field. Of course, we can also fill in the given name and the surname and every other fields that you want. What I also would like to show you that I used a log so that it will be, you have some sort of check that the users have been created, especially if a large amount. It's pretty simple. You can make it far more advanced if you want, but just to demonstrate what the options are. Let me go to the import directory. There you have the log. I used it with the date and time when it was created. If you open it, use Notepad in this case. And then you see it here. You see users that have been created. It's very basic, very simple, but at least you want to demonstrate in this script how you can set it up to create a lot of bulk users with the Microsoft Graph API. So that's about it. If you have any questions, please enter them in the comments below, and I hope to see you on the next one. Goodbye.